The winter of 1887 brought nothing but gray skies and bitter wind to the small town of Cedar Creek, Kansas. June Calder sat by the frosted window of her father's general store, watching the few townsfolk hurry past with their collars turned up against the cold. At 23, she had already earned herself a reputation as the town's perpetual spinster, too bookish, too particular, and far too fond of speaking her mind for any sensible man's taste. The bell above the door chimed as old Mr. Hutchins shuffled in, bringing with him a gust of icy air and a bundle of mail from the post office. "Letter for you, Miss June," he wheezed, producing an envelope from beneath his worn coat. "Looks like it traveled a fair piece to get here." June took the letter with mild curiosity. She rarely received mail beyond the occasional catalog from back east. The envelope was weather-stained and bore her name in an unfamiliar hand masculine. She thought, but careful, as if the writer had taken pains with each letter. Miss June Calder, Cedar Creek General Store, Kansas. She read aloud, then frowned. There was no return address, just a postmark from somewhere in Oregon Territory. After Mr. Hutchins departed with his usual pound of coffee and tin of tobacco, June retreated to the back room where she kept the store's books. The letter opener, a gift from her late mother, sliced through the paper with a soft whisper. Inside was a single sheet, the writing matching that on the envelope. "Dear Miss Calder, I hope this letter finds you well, though I fear it may find you confused. You see, I ordered a saddle from Hutchins & Sons in Omaha, and they assured me it would arrive at Cedar Creek Trading Post in Oregon Territory. Instead, I received a note saying my package was delivered to Cedar Creek General Store in Kansas to a Miss J. Calder, no less. I write this not to trouble you for the saddle. I've since resolved that matter with Hutchins, but to apologize for any inconvenience. The Postal Service, it seems, has a peculiar sense of humor. Since I've already imposed upon your time, I might as well confess I'm curious about your Kansas. Here in Oregon, the rain falls like it's got nowhere else to be, and the mountains wear clouds like old men wear hats. Is it true what they say about Kansas skies, that they stretch so wide a man might lose himself just looking up? Forgive my rambling. Months on the range with only horses for company tends to make a fellow forget his manners. Respectfully, Reed Thatcher. P.S. If you've a mind to write back, address it to Thatcher Ranch, Willow Falls, Oregon Territory. If not, I understand. Not everyone cares to correspond with strangers who can't even manage to get their packages delivered properly. June read the letter twice, then a third time. There was something disarming about the word self-deprecating without being pitiful, curious without being forward. She found herself smiling at the image of Oregon mountains wearing clouds like hats. That evening, after closing the store and enduring another silent supper with her father, who had spoken perhaps 10 words to her since her mother's passing 2 years prior, June sat at her small writing desk. The lamp cast a warm circle of light as she dipped her pen in ink. "Dear Mr. Thatcher, your letter found me neither well nor confused, but somewhere in between, which I suppose is the natural state of anyone living through a Kansas winter. I must admit, receiving unexpected mail provided the most interesting moment in what has been a decidedly uninteresting month. You needn't apologize for the Postal Service's error. If anything, I should thank them for the diversion. As for Kansas skies, yes, they do stretch wide, so wide that sometimes I fear if I stare too long, I might float right up into all that blue, though lately we see more gray than blue. Winter has a way of making the world smaller. Your Oregon sounds like something from a fairy tale. I've never seen mountains, unless you count the small hills outside town, which I'm told proper mountain folk would find laughable. Here, we have grass that rolls like ocean waves, or so I imagine, having never seen the ocean either, and a wind that never quite knows when to stop visiting. Since you asked about Kansas, might I ask about Oregon ranching? I confess I know little beyond what I've read in books, and books I'm learning rarely tell the whole truth about anything. Sincerely, June Calder. P. Se- the horses must be excellent conversationalists if they've kept you company for months. Our store cat, Milton, mainly complains about the weather and the quality of table scraps. She sealed the letter before she could reconsider. What harm could there be in writing to a stranger? It wasn't as if she were meeting him in person. Just words on paper, traveling across the vast space between Kansas and Oregon. 3 weeks later, another letter arrived. Then another. Reed wrote about breaking horses at dawn, about the way coffee tasted after a night sleeping under stars. He wrote about his younger brother Luke, who was better with horses than people, and could track a deer through a rainstorm. He never asked what June looked like, never suggested anything improper. He simply shared his world and asked about hers. June found herself looking forward to mail days with an anticipation that concerned her. She wrote about the gossiping church ladies who clucked their tongues at her unmarried state, about the books she read by lamplight, about the dream she'd had since childhood of seeing somewhere beyond Kansas's borders. "Have you always lived in Cedar Creek?" Reed asked in his 5th letter. "Born here, raised here, likely to die here." June wrote back, though perhaps that's too morbid a thought for letters between strangers. "We're hardly strangers now," came his reply. "Strangers don't know that you read Shakespeare to your cat or that you once climbed onto the roof of the general store just to see if the sunset looked different from up high. Did it?" "It looked exactly the same," June admitted in her next letter. "Only I felt different seeing it, smaller and larger all at once, if that makes any sense." "It makes perfect sense," Reed wrote back. By the 10th letter, June realized she was sharing things with Reed she'd never told another soul, how she sometimes felt like she was living someone else's life, how her father looked through her rather than at her, how she wondered if wanting more than what Cedar Creek offered made her ungrateful or just human. Reed's letters revealed his own struggles, the weight of running a ranch after his parents' passing, the loneliness that came with responsibility, the way the vastness of Oregon could make a man feel both free and terribly alone. "I've been thinking," Reed wrote as spring began to thaw Kansas's frozen earth, "about connections, how strange it is that a misdirected saddle could lead to this, whatever this is." June stared at those words for a long time. Whatever this is. She knew what it was becoming for her: a lifeline, a window, a dangerous blooming of hope in her carefully guarded heart. But she simply wrote back, "The Postal Service's peculiar sense of humor, as you called it, seems less like humor now and more like something else entirely, though I can't say what." Neither of them put a name to it. Not yet. But as June walked through Cedar Creek, enduring the knowing looks of townspeople who'd noticed her frequent trips to the post office, she carried Reed's latest letter in her pocket like a talisman. The paper was soft from folding and refolding, the words memorized but still treasured. "The sunrise here was particularly fine this morning." He'd written, "Made me wonder what sunrise looks like in Kansas. Made me wonder about a lot of things I probably shouldn't." June touched the letter through the fabric of her dress and allowed herself, just for a moment, to wonder, too. The 23rd letter arrived on a Tuesday that smelled like rain and regret. June's hands trembled as she read Reed's latest words, though not from the contents, which were as warm and wondering as always, but from the decision that had been building in her chest like a summer storm. "You asked once if I'd always lived in Cedar Creek," she wrote that night, the pen scratching against paper in her quiet room. "The truth is, I've been leaving this town in my mind every day for years. Maybe it's time my body caught up with my imagination." She didn't mail the letter. Instead, she placed it in her drawer alongside the small bundle of money she'd saved from her mother's inheritance and her wages from helping at the store. It wasn't much, but it would buy a train ticket. Whether it would buy her a new life remained to be seen. The confrontation with her father came at breakfast 3 days later. Samuel Calder looked up from his newspaper just long enough to grunt when June set his coffee before him black. No sugar, same as every morning since her mother died. "I'm leaving," June said, the words falling between them like stones in still water. Her father's hand paused halfway to his cup. "The Hendricks boy finally proposed about time. Thought you'd run him off with all your book reading." "No." June's voice stayed steady, though her hands clenched in her apron. "I'm going to Oregon." The newspaper lowered slowly. Her father's eyes, the same gray as her own, narrowed with something that might have been confusion or anger. With him, it was often hard to tell. "Oregon." He said it like she'd announced she was flying to the moon. "What foolishness is this?" "It's not foolishness. I've saved enough for the journey. Mrs. Morrison already agreed to help you with the store until you can hire someone." "This is about those letters." His voice cut through hers, sharp and knowing. "That cowboy you've been writing. You think I'm blind? Think the whole town hasn't noticed you mooning over the mail?" June lifted her chin. "His name is Reed Thatcher, and yes, we've been corresponding, but this isn't just about him. This is about me needing to be somewhere else. Somewhere I'm not just poor June Calder, the spinster who talks too much and thinks too much and will die in the same house she was born in." "Your mother did exactly that," her father said quietly. "Died in the house she was born in. Was her life so terrible?" The question hung between them. Heavy with grief neither had properly addressed. June's mother had been the bridge between them, the translator who helped them understand each other. Without her, they were just two strangers sharing a roof and a name. "No," June said finally. "But it was her life, her choice. This is mine." Her father returned to his newspaper. "Then go. But don't come crying back when you find out that cowboys in letters ain't the same as cowboys in life." June packed light, as the travel guide suggested. 2 dresses, one for every day and one for Sunday, her mother's silver brush, a photograph of her parents from their wedding day, when they both still smiled, her small collection of books, though she'd agonized over which to leave behind, and at the bottom of her trunk, wrapped in brown paper, all of Reed's letters. She didn't tell him she was coming. Part of her feared he'd tell her not to, that the intimacy of their correspondence couldn't survive the harsh light of reality. Another part feared he'd be too eager, that she'd arrive to find expectations she wasn't prepared to meet. Better to simply appear, she reasoned, and let fate sort out the rest. The morning she left, her father was already at the store. She'd said her goodbye the night before, an awkward exchange that ended with him pressing a small leather purse into her hands. "Your mother's egg money," he'd said gruffly. "She was saving it for something special. Guess this counts." Now, June stood on the empty platform, watching the eastern horizon for smoke that would signal the train's arrival. Mrs. Henderson from the post office appeared beside her, clutching a package. "Heard you were leaving," the older woman said. "About time, if you ask me. Girl like you wasn't meant for Cedar Creek." "I don't know what I'm meant for," June admitted. "Mrs." Henderson smiled, the expression creating a map of wrinkles on her weathered face. "That's the point of leaving, ain't it, to find out?" The train arrived in a cloud of steam and noise that made June's heart race. She'd read about trains, of course, but experiencing one was different, the massive iron beast breathing smoke, the conductor calling all aboard like a command from God himself. June found a window seat and watched Cedar Creek shrink until it was nothing but a cluster of buildings against the vast Kansas plain. Then even that was gone, replaced by an endless sea of grass that rippled in the train's wake. The journey would take 5 days, with changes in Denver and Salt Lake City. June had mapped it all out, memorizing schedules and station names. But as the miles rolled by, she realized no amount of planning could prepare her for the reality of moving toward an uncertain future at 20 miles an hour. She dozed fitfully the first night, waking to find they'd entered Colorado. The mountains rose like promises on the horizon, their peaks catching the dawn light. June pressed her face to the window, drinking in the sight, real mountains, just as Reed had described them wearing clouds like hats. In Denver, she had a 4-hour layover. She wandered the station, marveling at the mix of people, cowboys and businessmen, Ladies in silk and women in homespun. Children chasing each other between the benches while their mothers called warnings in languages June didn't recognize. "First time traveling alone, miss?" asked a kindly-faced woman who'd been on June's train. "First time traveling at all," June confessed. "The woman, Mrs. Garrett." She introduced herself, took June under her wing for the remainder of the journey. She was heading to California to join her son and knew all the tricks of train travel. Where to buy decent food, how to sleep sitting up without getting a crick in your neck, which conductors were helpful and which were best avoided. "Running to something or from something, Mrs.?" Garrett asked on their third day, as Utah's alien landscape rolled past. "Both, I think," June said. "Is that foolish?" "Honey, at my age, the only foolish thing is staying somewhere that's killing you slowly just because it's familiar." As they crossed into Oregon, June's stomach began to twist with equal parts excitement and dread. The landscape changed again, forests so thick they blocked the sun, rivers that rushed with purpose toward the sea. Everything was green and alive in a way that made Kansas seem like a sepia photograph. "Willow Falls, next stop Willow Falls," the conductor called. June's hands shook as she gathered her belongings. "Mrs." Garrett squeezed her shoulder. "Whatever you're looking for," the older woman said. "I hope you find it, or something better." The train slowed, and June could see the platform ahead, a small wooden structure that looked barely more substantial than the one she'd left in Kansas. But beyond it lay a town nestled between mountains, smoke rising from chimneys, horses tied to posts along a muddy main street. Somewhere in this unfamiliar place was Reed Thatcher, who knew her thoughts but not her face, who had written beautiful words about sunrises and loneliness and the way coffee tasted under stars. June stood, smoothed her travel-worn dress, and prepared to step off the train and into whatever came next. The decision that had seemed so momentous in Kansas now felt like just another stop on a journey she was only beginning to understand. The train shuddered to a halt. The door opened. Oregon air damp and piney, and nothing like home filled her lungs. June Calder picked up her trunk and stepped into her new life, leaving 23 years of Kansas dust on the train behind her. The platform at Willow Falls was slick with recent rain, and June nearly lost her footing as she descended from the train. A porter steadied her elbow, and she murmured her thanks while scanning the small crowd for a face she'd never seen but somehow hoped to recognize. Reed wasn't there. The platform emptied quickly as passengers reunited with waiting families or hurried toward the town's muddy main street. June stood alone beside her trunk, the Oregon drizzle beginning to seep through her traveling cloak. She'd been so certain he would somehow know to be here, as if the connection forged through their letters could transcend the practical matter of train schedules and arrival times. "You waiting for someone, miss?" The station master, a grizzled man with kind eyes, approached with obvious concern. Yes. Reed Thatcher, from the Thatcher Ranch." Even saying his name aloud felt strange, like speaking a private language in public. The man's expression shifted to something June couldn't quite read. "Reed Thatcher. Well now." He rubbed his whiskers thoughtfully. "Haven't seen Reed in town for, 2 weeks or more. Heard he took a bad spill. Horse spooked by a rattler. Threw him into a fence post. Last I knew, Doc Morrison was still making trips out to the ranch." June's heart clenched. Injured. Reed was injured, possibly seriously, and she'd arrived unannounced like some character from a dime novel, expecting... What a romantic reunion at a train station. "Could you direct me to the post office?" she asked, forcing her voice to remain steady. "I need to send word that I've arrived." "Just down Main Street, red building with the flag. But if you're looking for somewhere to stay, Mrs. Eliza Patterson runs a respectable boarding house for ladies, 2 blocks past the post office, white house with green shutters." June thanked him and hired a boy with a wheelbarrow to transport her trunk. The walk through Willow Falls revealed a town larger than Cedar Creek, but with the same watchful eyes behind curtained windows. Mud sucked at her boots with each step, and by the time she reached the post office, the hem of her traveling dress was thoroughly soaked. The postmistress was a sharp-eyed woman named Mrs. Dolores Hutchley, who took in June's bedraggled appearance with obvious curiosity. "I need to send a message to the Thatcher Ranch," June said, then hesitated. What could she possibly say? "Dear Reed, I've crossed half the continent to surprise you, but it seems the surprise is on me." Mrs. Hutchley must have seen her distress. "You're the young lady from Kansas," she said, not a question but a statement. "Reed mentioned you might visit someday, though I don't think he expected it quite so soon." Heat flooded June's cheeks. So Reed had spoken of her. That was something, at least. "I heard he was injured," June said. 2 weeks ago, that Arabian stallion finally got the better of him. Men and their pride. Mrs. Hutchley shook her head. "Tell you what, the Thatcher Ranch is only 5 miles out. My nephew Tom is heading that direction with supplies this afternoon. I'm sure he'd be happy for the company, and it'll save you the cost of hiring a wagon." June accepted gratefully, though the thought of arriving at the ranch like a piece of freight alongside flour sacks and fence posts wasn't quite the entrance she'd imagined during those long nights on the train. Tom Hutchley turned out to be a cheerful young man who filled the silence with chatter about the weather, the price of cattle, and local gossip. June half listened. Her attention focused on the landscape rolling past. Oregon was everything Reed had described, and more mountains that scraped the sky. Forests so dense they seemed to breathe, and everywhere the sound of water rushing over stones. "That's Thatcher land starting here," Tom announced, pointing to a wooden fence that stretched along the rutted road. "Good piece of property. Been in the family since Reed and Luke's father claimed it back in '59. "Luke?" June asked, though she knew the name from Reed's letters. "The younger brother, quiet sort, probably the best horseman in 3 counties, though you'd never hear him say so. Keeps to himself mostly. Reed's the talker of the two." Tom glanced at her sideways. "Or at least he was. Before the accident, Doc says head injuries can change a man's temperament." June's anxiety deepened. What if Reed wasn't the same man who'd written those letters? What if the fall had altered more than his temperament? The ranch house appeared around a bend, a 2-story structure of weathered wood, with a wide porch and stone chimney sending smoke into the gray afternoon. It looked solid, permanent, like it had grown from the land rather than been built upon it. Tom pulled the wagon to a stop near the porch. "Want me to wait? Make sure someone's home?" Before June could answer, the front door opened. The man who emerged wasn't Reed, she knew that instinctively, though she couldn't say how. This man was taller, broader through the shoulders, with dark hair that needed cutting and eyes the color of fresh-turned earth. He moved with the careful grace of someone accustomed to working around unpredictable animals. "Tom." His voice was deep, rougher than June had imagined Reed's would be. "Didn't expect you until tomorrow. Got an early start and picked up a passenger." Tom hopped down and moved to help June from the wagon. "This is Miss June Calder, from Kansas." The man Luke, it had to be Luke, went very still. His gaze traveled from June's mud-stained boots to her travel-weary face, and something flickered in those brown eyes. Recognition, though they'd never met. Understanding, though she'd said nothing. "Miss Calder." He said her name carefully, like he was testing its weight. "Reed's mentioned you. Is he—" "I heard about the accident." June hated how small her voice sounded. Luke studied her for a long moment. "He's healing. Slowly. Didn't know you were coming." "He didn't know because I didn't tell him." The words tumbled out in a rush. I don't know what I thought. That I could just appear and everything would somehow make sense. But now I'm here, and he's injured. And I'm standing in your yard like some sort of—" She trailed off, unable to find words for what sort of fool she'd been. Tom shifted uncomfortably. clearly eager to complete his deliveries and escape the awkward scene. Luke stepped forward, taking charge with the same quiet authority she'd sensed in his movements. "Tom, leave Miss Calder's trunk. I'll see she gets to town later." He turned to June. "You've come a long way. Least we can do is offer you something hot to drink and a chance to rest." "But Reed is sleeping. Doc's orders. He sleeps more than he's awake these days." Luke's expression softened slightly. "But he'll want to see you when he wakes. He's read your letters so many times, I could probably recite them myself." June followed Luke into the house, her wet boots leaving marks on the wooden floor. The interior was exactly what she'd expected from Reed's descriptions, masculine and practical, but with touches of care. Braided rugs on the floors, curtains at the windows, books on shelves alongside riding tack and firearms. Luke led her to the kitchen and busied himself with the coffee pot. June sat at the scarred wooden table, trying to reconcile this reality with months of imagination. "You're not what I expected," Luke said suddenly, his back still to her as he worked. "What did you expect?" He turned, considering. "Someone less real, I suppose. Reed built you up so much in his talking. I half thought you were something he'd dreamed up to pass the winter." "I'm very real," June said. "Real enough to make a fool of myself, apparently." "Nothing foolish about it." Luke set a steaming mug before her. "Takes courage to chase something that might not be there when you arrive." They sat in silence while June sipped the coffee stronger than she was used to, but warming. Through the window, she could see horses in a distant pasture, their shapes blurred by mist. "What's he like?" she asked finally. "Reed. Not in letters, but in life." Luke's mouth quirked in what might have been a smile. "Stubborn. Talks too much when he's nervous. Laughs at his own jokes. Can't carry a tune but sings anyway. Gives the horses stupid names and then defends them like they're Shakespeare." He paused. "Good man, though. Better than most." Footsteps on stairs interrupted them. June's heart leaped. But the man who appeared in the doorway was clearly not well. Reed Thatcher looked nothing like she'd imagined, thinner, paler, with bandages still wrapped around his head. His eyes, a lighter brown than his brother's, seemed to struggle to focus. "Luke thought I heard voices." He stopped, noticing June. Confusion crossed his features. "I'm sorry, Miss, I don't—" "This is June Calder," Luke said quietly. "From Kansas." Reed blinked slowly, processing. "June, my June, but you're here." "I'm here," June confirmed, her voice barely a whisper. Reed took a step forward and swayed. Luke was beside him instantly, steadying him with practiced ease. "You need to sit," Luke said firmly. "Doc said no exertion." "To hell with the doc," Reed muttered, but he allowed Luke to guide him to a chair. His gaze never left June's face. "You're really here? I'm not dreaming this." "Not unless we're sharing the dream," June said, attempting lightness despite the lump in her throat. This wasn't the reunion she'd imagined. Reed looked at her like she was a stranger. And perhaps she was. Perhaps they both were. "I should have written," she continued. "Told you I was coming, but I was afraid. Afraid I'd tell you not to." Reed's smile was wan but genuine. "Might have. Man likes to be presentable when meeting a lady he's been corresponding with. Not lying around like an invalid with his brother playing nursemaid." "You need rest," Luke interjected. "And Miss Calder needs to get settled. I'll take her to Mrs. Patterson's boarding house." "No." Reed's voice gained strength. "She came all this way. Least we can do is offer proper hospitality." He looked at June. "That is, if you'd stay, we've got a guest room. It's not fancy, but—" June glanced between the brothers, reading an entire conversation in their exchanged looks. Luke disapproving but resigned. Reed determined despite his obvious exhaustion. "I'd be honored," she said simply. And so June Calder found herself sitting in the kitchen of the Thatcher Ranch, drinking coffee with two strangers who weren't quite strangers, wondering what story she'd written herself into and whether it would have the ending she'd dreamed of on those long nights crossing the prairie. Outside, the Oregon rain began again, gentle but insistent, washing away her footprints from the yard as if she'd never arrived at all. The first week at the Thatcher Ranch taught June that letters could lie without meaning to, not through falsehood, but through omission, all the spaces between words where reality lived. Reed in person was indeed the man who'd written those thoughtful letters, but he was also irritable from pain, frustrated by his limitations, and prone to long silences that stretched like accusations. The head injury had left him with piercing headaches that struck without warning, sending him to his darkened room for hours at a time. "He's not usually like this," Luke said on the third morning, finding June alone on the porch with her coffee. She'd taken to rising early, needing the quiet moments before the house stirred to life. "The letters never mentioned his temper," June replied, trying not to sound as disappointed as she felt. Luke leaned against the porch rail, his own coffee steaming in the cool morning air. "Man doesn't put his worst qualities in letters, especially not to a lady he's trying to impress." Was he trying to impress me? Every time he sat down to write, he'd fuss over the words like he was penning scripture. Sometimes took him 3 drafts to say what he wanted. Luke's expression was unreadable. Of course, that was before the accident. June had noticed the differences, where Reed's letters had been flowing and poetic. His speech now came in short bursts, as if words cost him dearly. He snapped at Luke for hovering, at June for trying to help, at himself for needing both. "I don't need you playing nursemaid." Reed had growled just yesterday when she'd brought him headache powders. "Got along fine before you showed up." The words stung, even though she recognized pain speaking through him. She'd retreated to her room, wondering if she'd made a terrible mistake. In Kansas, she'd been unwanted but familiar with the boundaries. Here, she was a guest who'd invited herself, a burden disguised as company. But then there were moments, fleeting, precious, when the Reed from the letters emerged, like when she'd found him on the porch at sunset, watching the horses in the lower pasture. "That's Beatrice," he'd said, pointing to a bay mare. "And the black one's Hamlet. Luke says I give them pretentious names, but horses have dignity. Deserve better than being called Blackie or Spot." "In your letters, you mentioned a horse named Cordelia." Reed's face had softened. "My mare. She's in the barn expecting a foal come spring. Would you like to meet her?" They'd walked slowly to accommodate his unsteady gait, in the barn's dim warmth. Cordelia had pressed her velvet nose into Reed's palm, and for a moment, June saw the man she'd traveled so far to find, gentle, thoughtful, connected to the world around him in ways that went deeper than words. But those moments were rare. More often, Reed withdrew into himself, leaving June to navigate the strange dynamics of the ranch household. Luke, she discovered, was the one who truly ran things. He was up before dawn and rarely stopped moving until well after dark. He spoke little but noticed everything, including June's growing discomfort. "You know you don't have to stay," Luke said one evening as they prepared dinner together. Reed had retreated to his room with another headache, leaving them alone. No shame in realizing something's not what you expected. June paused in peeling potatoes. "Is that what you want for me to leave?" "What I want doesn't matter. This is between you and Reed." "Is it?" June set down the knife. "You've been here every day, taking care of him, managing the ranch. You're as much a part of this as anyone." Luke was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. "Finally," he said. "Reed's all the family I've got left. If he's happy, I'm happy. Question is, are you?" June couldn't answer. Happy seemed too simple a word for the complex knot of emotions she carried. Disappointed, yes. Confused, certainly. But also stubborn enough to believe that somewhere beneath Reed's pain and frustration was the connection they'd built through ink and paper. The next morning brought a break in the rain and Reed's headaches. June found him in the kitchen, dressed properly for the first time since her arrival. attempting to make coffee. "Let me," she said, reaching for the pot. "I can manage," but his hands shook, and coffee grounds scattered across the counter. Without thinking, June placed her hand over his to steady it. Reed froze, and she realized it was the first time they'd touched beyond the formalities of introduction. "I'm not myself," he said quietly. "Haven't been since the fall. Sometimes I think I left the best parts of me in the dirt where that damn horse threw me." "Or maybe," June said, not moving her hand, "those parts are just resting, healing, like the rest of you." Reed turned to face her fully. This close. She could see the green flecks in his brown eyes, the scar on his chin he'd mentioned falling from a tree as a boy. Real details that no letter could convey. "Why did you come?" he asked. "Really?" "Because I couldn't sleep anymore in Kansas," June answered honestly. "Because your letters made me believe there was something more than what I had. Because I was brave in the middle of the night when I bought that train ticket. And by the time I was scared, it was too late to turn back." "And now are you sorry?" June considered lying, offering comfort instead of truth. But they'd shared too much honesty in their letters to start deceiving each other now. "Sometimes," she admitted, "when you snap at me for trying to help, when you look at me like I'm a stranger, when I remember that knowing someone's thoughts isn't the same as knowing them." Reed's jaw tightened. "So you'll leave?" "Did I say that?" June pulled her hand away, busying herself with the coffee preparation. "I traveled 5 days to get here. Seems foolish to give up after just 1 week." "Most would say it's more foolish to stay." "Most people haven't read your letters." June poured water into the pot, her movements precise. "The man who wrote about watching sunrise from Elk Ridge, who compared the sound of rain to memory, he's in there somewhere. I can wait." Reed was quiet while the coffee brewed, filling the kitchen with its bitter comfort. "Finally," he said, "I never lied in those letters. Want you to know that everything I wrote, I meant." "I know." June poured 2 cups, added sugar to hers, left his black as she'd learned he preferred. "I didn't lie either, but we both told the truth slant. Didn't we showed our best angles, like sitting for a portrait? And now you see me straight on." "Now I see you straight on," June agreed. "The question is, what do we do about it?" Before Reed could answer, Luke entered with an armload of firewood. He took in the scene, the two of them standing close, coffee cups between them like peace offerings, and something shifted in his expression. Just for a moment, June caught what looked like resignation, maybe even sadness, before his usual stoic mask returned. "Storm coming," Luke announced, though the morning sky visible through the window was clear. "Need to move the horses to the upper pasture." Reed straightened, his body tensing with automatic responsibility. "I'll help." "No," Luke's voice was firm. "Doc said another week before you're back in the saddle. I can manage." "It's my ranch too. Luke, can't coddle me forever." "Not coddling, being practical. You get yourself killed trying to prove something. And then, where would we be?" The brothers stared at each other, years of shared history condensing into a silent battle of wills. June recognized the pattern now, Reed pushing, Luke protecting. Both of them dancing around grief and fear and love too complicated for simple words. "I could help," June offered. Both men turned to her in surprise. "I might not know much about ranching, but I can follow directions. An extra pair of hands is an extra pair of hands." Luke studied her, and June had the feeling she was being measured against some standard she didn't understand. "You ever work around horses?" he asked. "Our milk delivery came by wagon. Does that count?" Reed laughed, the first genuine laugh she'd heard from him since arriving. It transformed his face, easing the lines of pain and frustration. "She's got spine. Luke, give her a chance." Luke nodded slowly. "All right, but you do exactly as I say. Horses can sense inexperience, and scared horses are dangerous horses." An hour later, June found herself in borrowed trousers and an old shirt of reeds, learning the basics of herding horses. Luke was a patient teacher, his movements sure and calm as he showed her how to approach the animals, how to use her body position to guide them without spooking them. "You're a natural," he said as she successfully guided a mare named Ophelia toward the gate. "Most people try to force it. You're working with them instead of against them." June glowed under the praise, feeling useful for the first time since arriving. From the porch, Reed watched their progress, and she caught him smiling more than once. By the time they finished, June was exhausted, muddy, and oddly exhilarated. She'd done something completely outside her experience, and she'd done it well. Luke's approval, hard-won and genuine, meant more than she'd expected. That evening, as they sat down to dinner, the atmosphere had shifted. Reed seemed lighter, participating in the conversation instead of brooding. Luke actually smiled when June told the story of Ophelia attempting to eat her borrowed hat. For the first time, the three of them felt less like strangers forced together and more like something that might, with time and patience, become a family. "Thank you," Reed said later, as June prepared to retire. "For staying, for helping, for—" He gestured vaguely, encompassing everything unsaid. "We're still learning each other," June replied. "Letters were just the introduction. This is the real story." "And how do you think it ends?" June considered. "I don't know, but I'm willing to keep reading to find out." That night, she heard Reed and Luke talking quietly on the porch, their voices carrying through her open window. She couldn't make out the words, but the tone was different than usual, less strained, more hopeful. Maybe they were all learning each other, reshaping themselves around new possibilities. The storm Luke had predicted arrived 3 days later with a vengeance that made Kansas thunderstorms seem like gentle showers. June woke to the sound of wind howling like a living thing and snow unexpected for late autumn driving sideways past her window. She dressed quickly and made her way downstairs to find the brothers already in the kitchen, their faces grim in the lamplight. "Lost 2 sections of fence on the north pasture." Luke was saying, "If we don't get those horses moved, they'll scatter to hell and back." "We can manage it," Reed insisted, though June noticed he gripped the table edge as he stood. His headaches had improved, but his balance remained uncertain. "Not in this weather. Not with your—" "Don't say it." Reed's voice carried a warning. "I'm tired of being treated like spun glass." The argument that had been building for days finally erupted. June pressed herself against the doorframe, uncertain whether to intervene or retreat. "You nearly died." Luke slammed his coffee cup down hard enough to slosh liquid across the table. "That horse threw you 20 feet. You were unconscious for 2 days. Doc said another inch and that fence post would have—" "But it didn't." Reed matched his brother's volume. "I'm here, I'm healing, and I'm tired of you acting like I'm Pa on his deathbed." The mention of their father struck like lightning. Luke went rigid, his face closing off in a way June had learned meant deep hurt. "That's not fair," Luke said quietly. "None of this is fair." Reed's anger seemed to leave him all at once. He sank back into his chair, suddenly looking every bit the invalid he'd been trying not to be. "I can't even help with my own ranch. Can't ride, can't work, can't even court a lady properly without my little brother playing chaperone." June felt heat rise in her cheeks at being discussed like she wasn't present. But before she could speak, Luke laughed a bitter sound she'd never heard from him. "Court her, is that what you think you're doing?" Luke shook his head. "You can barely stand to have her in the same room. You snap at her for breathing too loud when your head hurts. And she's supposed to wait around for you to decide you're well enough to remember your manners." "Luke!" June stepped forward, unable to remain silent. "That's enough!" Both men turned to her, seeming to remember she was there. "I'm sorry," Reed said stiffly. "You shouldn't have to witness this." "No, I shouldn't." June moved to the stove, needing something to do with her hands. "But since I'm here, since I'm apparently the subject of discussion, Maybe I should have a say. She poured herself coffee with deliberate calm, though her hands wanted to shake. Outside, the storm raged harder, rattling windows in their frames. You want to know what I think? She faced them both. I think you're so busy protecting each other from pain that you're causing more of it. Luke, Reed needs to feel useful, even if it scares you. And Reed, your brother's concern comes from love, not pity, though you're both too stubborn to see it. You've been here 2 weeks, Reed said coldly. Don't presume to understand us. The dismissal stung more than any of his previous sharp words. June set down her cup carefully, afraid she might throw it otherwise. You're right, I don't understand you. The Reed who wrote to me about brotherhood, about how Luke was the better half of my whole, that man would never use his brother's love as a weapon. And the Luke in those letters, who could track a deer through a rainstorm and once stayed up 3 nights with a sick colt. He wouldn't wrap his brother in cotton wool like some fragile ornament. She pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders. I'm going to help Mrs. Patterson in town today. When I return, perhaps you'll have remembered that you're family, not enemies. June left them sitting in stunned silence. She dressed warmly, packed a small bag, and set out on foot toward town despite the worsening weather. The walk that had seemed pleasant on clear days became a battle against wind and snow. By the time she reached Mrs. Patterson's boarding house, she was soaked through and shivering. "Mercy, Mrs." Patterson exclaimed, pulling June inside. "What are you doing out in this weather, child?" June couldn't answer through chattering teeth. The older woman bustled her upstairs, helped her into dry clothes, and pressed a hot cup of tea into her hands. The Thatcher boys have a disagreement, Mrs. Patterson asked knowingly. At June's surprised look, she smiled. Dear, everyone in town knows you're staying at the ranch, and everyone knows those two have been wound tighter than clock springs since their parents passed. Reed's accident just made it worse. I shouldn't have come, June said miserably. I've only made things more complicated. Or maybe you've brought things to a head that needed bringing. Mrs. Patterson settled into the chair across from her. I knew their mother. You see, lovely woman. She used to say her boys were like 2 halves of one person. Reed all dreams and talk. Luke all action and silence. Take one away, and the other's lost. They seem determined to push each other away. Fear does that. Makes us cruel to the ones we can't bear to lose. Mrs. Patterson refilled June's cup. Question is, are you planning to stay and see it through, or are you looking for a reason to leave? June stared into her tea, watching steam rise and dissipate. I don't know. The man I thought I knew. Sometimes I see glimpses of him, but then he disappears again, and I'm left with someone who resents my presence. Reed Thatcher's been writing stories his whole life, Mrs. Patterson said gently. In his head, on paper, in the tales he tells at the saloon. That's his gift and his curse. Reality has a hard time measuring up to the stories we tell ourselves. They spent the afternoon mending clothes and preparing food for families affected by the storm. June found comfort in the simple work and the older woman's easy companionship. But as evening approached and the storm showed signs of breaking, she knew she had to return to the ranch. Mrs. Patterson insisted on having her nephew drive June back. No more walking in blizzards, she said firmly. You've proved whatever point you needed to make. The ranch was quiet when June arrived. She found Luke in the barn, tending the horses by lantern light. He looked up as she entered, and she was shocked to see exhaustion etched deep in his features. Reed, she asked, suddenly afraid. In the house, we got the horses moved. Luke turned back to brushing Cordelia. Took both of us. He did better than I expected. And you, are you all right? Luke's hand stilled on the brush. Why would you ask that? Because everyone worries about Reed, but who worries about you? Luke was quiet for so long June thought he wouldn't answer. Finally, he said. Reed wrote about you for months before you arrived. Read me parts of your letters. The funny observations. The way you described Kansas sunsets. I started looking forward to mail days almost as much as he did. June's heart skipped. Luke, I'm not saying this right. He set down the brush, turning to face her. What I mean is, I understand why he invited you into his life through those letters. You have a way of seeing things, of saying things, that makes the world seem more. And I'm glad you're here, even if it's complicated, even if it's hard. But nothing. Reed's my brother. What matters to him matters to me. Luke picked up the lantern. Come on, you must be hungry. And there's stew on the stove. They walked back to the house together through the dying storm. Inside, they found Reed at the kitchen table with paper and pen in front of him, though the page was blank. Trying to write, he said without looking up. Wanted to tell you about the storm, about moving the horses, but the words won't come like they used to. June hung her wet cloak and moved to stand beside him. Maybe that's because I'm here. No need to write what you can say. Reed looked up at her then, and she saw uncertainty in his eyes. I'm sorry. About this morning, about all of it. You came all this way for someone who doesn't exist anymore. Or maybe, June said, echoing her words from days before. He just needs time to remember who he is. Luke set bowls on the table, ladled out stew, sliced bread. They ate in silence, but it was different from the strained quiet of recent days. This felt like the calm after a storm, when everything is washed clean and ready to begin again. I've been thinking, Reed said finally, about what you said, about us protecting each other from pain. He looked at Luke. Maybe you're right. Maybe I have been acting like Pa, too proud to admit I need help. And maybe I've been holding on too tight, Luke admitted. Afraid if I let go, I'd lose you like we lost them. June watched the brothers navigate toward each other with the careful steps of people relearning a familiar dance. There was still hurt there, still fear, but also the foundation of love that had carried them this far. The storm's passed, she observed, looking toward the window where stars were beginning to appear. This one has, Reed agreed. But winter's coming. There'll be more. Then we'd better learn to weather them better, Luke said. Reed reached for the pen again, and this time, when he set it to paper, words seemed to flow. June glimpsed the first line. Dear June, today I remembered something important. She smiled and rose to help Luke clear the table, leaving Reed to his letter. Some things, she was learning, were better written than spoken, but the best things, the real things, required both words and presence, ink and flesh. The dream of connection and the harder work of actually connecting. Outside, the world lay white and pristine under new snow, waiting for tomorrow's footprints. Inside, 3 people who had been strangers were slowly, carefully, becoming something else. Not the story any of them had imagined, but perhaps the one they needed. June could have left after the storm. Mrs. Patterson had made it clear she'd be welcome at the boarding house, and there was talk of the mercantile needing help with their books. She had options now, paths that led away from the complicated tangle of the Thatcher ranch. Instead, she stayed. Each morning, she rose before dawn to help Luke with the horses. He'd taught her to muck stalls, measure feed, check hooves for stones. Her hands grew calloused, her arms strong. The horses began to recognize her, Ophelia nickering softly when she approached, Hamlet nosing her pockets for the carrots she'd taken to carrying. You don't have to do this, Luke said one morning as they worked side by side in the barn's dim warmth. Ranch work isn't what you came here for. Maybe not, June agreed, lifting another forkful of hay. But it's what needs doing. Reed's recovery progressed in fits and starts. Good days when he could work alongside them. Bad days when the headaches confined him to darkness. June learned to read the signs, the tightness around his eyes, the way he'd press his fingers to his temples. On those days, she'd quietly take over whatever task he'd been attempting, allowing him to retreat without feeling useless. The town noticed, of course. Willow Falls was small enough that June's continued presence at the ranch became a favorite topic of gossip. She heard the whispers when she accompanied Luke to pick up supplies. "That's the Kansas girl. Came out to marry Reed Thatcher, but now folks say she's sweet on the younger brother. Scandalous, if you ask me, living out there with 2 unmarried men. Heard she does ranch work like a hired hand. What kind of lady splits wood and tends horses?" June held her head high and ignored them. Though the words stung, in Cedar Creek, she'd been too odd to marry. In Willow Falls, she was something worse, a woman who'd stepped outside the narrow boundaries of propriety. It was Luke who finally addressed it, in his indirect way. They were in town again, loading feed sacks, when Mrs. Abigail Crawford, the banker's wife and Willow Falls' self-appointed moral guardian, approached with her coterie of followers. "Miss Calder," Mrs. Crawford's voice dripped false concern. "We've been so worried about you, dear, a young lady in your situation. Perhaps it would be more appropriate if you accepted Mrs. Patterson's kind offer of accommodation." Before June could respond, Luke straightened from the wagon. He rarely spoke in town, preferring to let Reed handle social interactions. But Reed wasn't there, and June was facing the pack alone. "Miss Calder is helping us through a difficult time," Luke said, his voice carrying quiet authority. "Her kindness and hard work have been a blessing. Anyone suggesting otherwise might want to examine their own character before questioning hers." Mrs. Crawford's mouth opened and closed like a landed fish. Luke touched the brim of his hat, a gesture of dismissal, not respect, and helped June onto the wagon seat. They rode out of town in silence, but June caught him glancing at her sideways. "Thank you," she said finally. "Don't like bullies," Luke replied. "Never have." That evening, June found Reed on the porch despite the cold. He'd taken to sitting there in the evenings, watching the sunset paint the mountains purple and gold. "Heard you caused a stir in town," he said as she settled beside him. "Luke caused the stir. I just stood there like a startled deer." Reed smiled, a real smile, not the forced versions he'd been practicing. Luke standing up to Abigail Crawford. "Wish I'd seen it. Woman's had the whole town buffaloed for years." "He was defending my honor," June said lightly, though the memory warmed her. "Someone should." Reed's expression grew serious. "This isn't fair to you. June, you came here for—" He gestured vaguely. "Something else. Not nursemaiding an invalid and becoming ranch help. Not town gossip and speculation." "I came here for you," June said simply. "The you I knew through letters, and I've found him, just distributed differently than I expected." Reed frowned. "What do you mean?" June chose her words carefully. "Your thoughtfulness, I see it in the way Luke tends the animals. Your humor, it's there when you name the horses after Shakespeare characters. Your way with words? Well, that's been harder. But it's coming back. And what if it doesn't? What if this is who I am now, broken, dependent, half the man who wrote those letters? Then you're still twice the man I'd find anywhere else." Reed was quiet for a long moment. "Then Luke's half in love with you, you know." June's breath caught. "Reed?" "I'm not blind, despite the head injury. See the way he looks at you when he thinks no one's watching? The way he started humming while he works. Luke never hums. And defending you in town, my brother would face down a grizzly before speaking up in public." "It doesn't matter," June said firmly. "Doesn't it?" Reed turned to face her fully. "You came here for one thing and found another. Maybe that's fate trying to tell us something." "I don't believe in fate." June pulled her shawl tighter. "I believe in choices. And I choose to stay here, to help where I'm needed, to wait for—" She paused, uncertain how to finish. "For me to miraculously become the man from the letters again. For you to realize you still are him, just rearranged by circumstances." They sat in companionable silence as stars began to appear. Inside, June could hear Luke moving about the kitchen, preparing dinner. The domestic sounds, cabinet doors opening. The scrape of a pan on the stove had become the rhythm of her days. "I saw Doc Morrison yesterday," Reed said suddenly. "He thinks the headaches will lessen with time, maybe disappear altogether. But the other things, the balance issues, the way words sometimes slip away, those might be permanent. And I need to stop waiting to get better before living my life." He reached over, covered her hand with his. It was the second time they'd touched deliberately, and June felt the connection like electricity. "You've been patient with me, more than I deserved." Patience comes easier when you care about someone. Reed squeezed her hand gently, then let go. "I need to tell Luke. About us, about my intentions. He deserves that honesty." "Reed, there's nothing between Luke and me." "Not from your side, no. But brotherhood means acknowledging the whole truth, even the inconvenient parts." Reed stood carefully, testing his balance. "Come on, if Luke's cooking, we'd better get in there before he burns something. Man can doctor a horse or track a deer, but he never did master the stove." They found Luke frowning at a skillet where something that might have once been chicken now resembled charcoal. June smoothly took over, salvaging what she could while the brothers set the table. The ease of it, the three of them moving around each other with practiced familiarity, struck her anew. Over dinner, Reed cleared his throat. "Luke, we need to talk." Luke set down his fork, instantly alert. About June, about my intentions, about the fact that you've got feelings you're not speaking." The silence that followed was deafening. June felt her cheeks burn but forced herself not to look away. Luke's face had gone carefully blank, his default, when emotions ran too deep for comfort. "Don't know what you mean," Luke said finally. "Brother, we've shared too much truth to start lying now." Reed's voice was gentle. "It's all right, natural, even June's. She's everything a man could want. Kind, strong, patient, beautiful." "Stop!" Luke pushed back from the table. "Just stop!" He strode out, letting the door bang behind him. June started to rise, but Reed caught her wrist. "Let him go. He needs to work it out in his own time, his own way." "I never meant to cause problems between you," June said miserably. "You didn't cause anything, just illuminated what was already there." Reed's thumb brushed her pulse point before he released her. "Luke spent so long taking care of me. He's forgotten to want anything for himself. Maybe this will remind him he's allowed to have feelings beyond duty." They finished dinner quietly, saving a plate for Luke. June was washing dishes when she heard the barn door open and close. Through the window, she could see lantern light spilling across the snow. Without overthinking it, she dried her hands and slipped outside. She found Luke in Cordelia's stall, checking the pregnant mare with unnecessary thoroughness. "She's fine," June said softly. "You checked her 2 hours ago." Luke didn't turn. Horses are simpler than people. Their needs make sense. "I'm sorry." "For what?" Luke's hands kept moving over Cordelia's sides. "For being yourself, for making Reed remember how to smile, for making me wish." He stopped, shoulders rigid. "What do you wish?" June asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted the answer. Luke finally faced her. In the lantern light, his eyes were dark, unreadable. "I wish you'd come for me. Wish those letters had found their way to someone who could love you freely, without complications, without brothers or accidents or the weight of what came first." June's heart broke a little. "Luke, but you didn't come for me, and Reed saw you first, loved you first through all those words." Luke's smile was sad but genuine. "He's the better man anyway. Always was. I needed to say it once, out loud, so it doesn't fester between us." "You're a good man. Luke Thatcher. Any woman would be lucky." "But not you." It wasn't a question. "I know. Known since the day you arrived. Really, you looked at Reed like he hung the moon, even when he could barely string 2 words together." June moved closer, placed a hand on his arm. I do care about you, just not the way you care about him. Luke covered her hand briefly, then stepped away. It's all right. Reed deserves happiness after everything. You both do. They stood in the barn's quiet warmth, surrounded by the soft sounds of horses settling for the night. Finally, Luke picked up the lantern. We should go in. Reed'll worry if we're both gone too long. As they walked back to the house, June felt something shift, a corner turned. A decision made. She'd stayed when she could have left, chosen the harder path of patience and work. Now Luke had chosen to love over want, family over desire. Inside, Reed was writing again, pages covering the table. He looked up as they entered, scanning both their faces with obvious concern. Everything all right? Everything's fine, Luke said. He moved to the stove, served himself from the saved plate. Storm coming tomorrow. We'll need to shore up the chicken coop roof. And just like that, they returned to the rhythm of ranch life. But underneath the ordinary tasks and quiet conversation, June felt the foundations settling into something permanent. She'd found her place here, not the one she'd imagined, but the one shaped by daily choice and gradual understanding. That night, as she prepared for bed, June pulled out her own writing materials. She had letters to write to her father, to Mrs. Patterson, to the friends she'd left in Kansas. Letters full of truth, both beautiful and difficult, about the life she was building in Oregon, about the man she'd come to find and the men she'd found instead, about staying when leaving would be easier, about love that grows slowly in the spaces between words, about choosing the life you have over the life you'd imagined, and finding it better than any story. The conversation that changed everything began with June's inability to sleep. She'd grown accustomed to the ranch's night sounds wind in the pines, horses shifting in their stalls, the old house settling into itself. But this night felt different, charged with unspoken words and postponed reckonings. She found Luke on the porch, a figure carved from shadow and moonlight. He didn't startle when she joined him, just shifted to make room on the bench Reed had built before his accident. Can't sleep either, she asked. Haven't been sleeping much lately. Luke's voice was rough, honest in the way darkness made possible. Keep thinking about leaving. June's heart clenched. Leaving. Been here my whole life. Maybe it's time to see what else is out there. He gestured toward the mountains. Invisible now, but always present. Reed doesn't need me like he used to. He's getting stronger. And with you here, I'm not your replacement. Luke. No. He turned to look at her, and in the faint light from the window, she could see the exhaustion written on his face. But you're his future, and maybe it's time I found mine. They sat in silence while June processed this. The ranch without Luke seemed impossible, like trying to imagine the sky without stars. He'll be lost without you, she said finally. He'll have you. That's not the same. Luke laughed softly, without humor. No, it's not. But maybe that's good. Reed and we've been holding each other up so long. Neither of us knows how to stand alone. Is that what you want to be alone? I want... Luke paused, choosing words carefully. I want to not want what I can't have. I want to wake up thinking about something besides my brother's happiness and whether the ranch will survive another winter. I want to find out who Luke Thatcher is when he's not just Reed's brother or the quiet one, or the man who keeps everything running while others dream. June understood then what she'd been too naive to see before. Luke wasn't just tired. He was drowning in responsibility he'd never asked for, suffocating under the weight of always being needed but never chosen. When? She asked. When would you leave? Spring? Maybe? After Cordelia foals and the worst of the calving is done. Give Reed time to heal fully. Learn the books. Figure out how to manage without me. And me, am I supposed to just step into your boots? You already have, in ways. Luke's smile was gentle. You see what needs doing and do it. You don't complain when things get hard. The horses trust you. Even the chickens have stopped running when you enter the coop. But I don't know you, June said, surprising herself with the vehemence. Not really. Reed writes about you all the time. Luke did this, Luke fixed that. Luke knows everything about everything. But you're like a ghost in your own life. Always there, but never fully present. Luke was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, Pa used to say I was born serious. Ma tried to lighten me up music lessons, books, even sent me to live with her sister in Portland one summer to see city life. Nothing took. I came back quieter than ever. Why? Because I knew what was coming. Saw Pa getting weaker, watched Ma pretend not to notice. Reed was 16, full of plans and dreams. Someone had to be ready when everything fell apart. Luke rubbed his face. Been being ready ever since. Forgot there might be something after the readiness. Luke. June reached out instinctively, then hesitated. Touch between them had become careful since that night in the barn. It's all right, he said. I'm not asking for anything, just talking. Haven't done much of that. Maybe that's part of the problem. The door opened behind them, and Reed emerged, moving carefully but steadily. His recovery had accelerated in recent weeks, as if his body had finally decided to cooperate with his will. Thought I heard voices, he said, then paused, taking in the scene June and Luke sitting close but not touching, the weight of interrupted conversation hanging in the air. Should I go? No. Luke stood. Was just telling June I'm thinking of traveling come spring, seeing some of the world beyond Willow Falls. Reed went very still. Traveling. Just for a while, year, maybe 2. Ranch will be in good hands with you and June. We haven't, that is, June and I aren't. Reed looked between them, clearly struggling. You can't leave because of us. Because of me. I'm leaving because of me, Luke said firmly. First selfish thing I've done in my life, and I'm not apologizing for it. The brothers faced each other, years of unspoken understanding crackling between them. June rose quietly, intending to give them privacy, but Reed caught her hand. Stay, please. This concerns you too. So she stayed, witness to a conversation that should have happened years ago. You've given up everything for this place, Reed said. For me, I know that. Wasn't a sacrifice. It was a choice. Was it, or was it just what needed doing? And you were the only one strong enough to do it? Reed's grip on June's hand tightened. I've been selfish. Luke, took your care for granted. Assumed you'd always be here to clean up my messes. Keep things running while I played with words and dreams. You were hurt. Before that, long before that. Reed's voice carried old guilt. Even in the letters to June, I painted pretty pictures while you did the real work. And now she's here, and I'm finally seeing what it cost you. Luke looked away, jaw tight. June recognized the expression, the same one he wore when gentling a spooked horse. All patience and suppressed feeling. It didn't cost me anything I wasn't willing to pay, Luke said finally. But that's just it. Reed stepped closer to his brother. You shouldn't have had to pay anything. This ranch was supposed to be ours together, not you carrying it while I... He stopped, frustration clear. I can't even find the right words anymore. See, still expecting you to translate what I mean. Make it real. Reed. Luke's voice was gentle. You're my brother. Taking care of you. This place, it's what I know how to do. It's who I am. No, June interjected, surprising all three of them. It's what you do. Who you are is something none of us really know, because you've spent so long being what everyone needed that you've forgotten to be yourself. Luke looked at her, and for a moment his careful control slipped. She saw hunger there, not for her, specifically, but for the possibility she represented, the chance to choose something purely for himself. She's right, Reed said quietly, and if you need to leave to find that out, then you should go, with my blessing. with my gratitude for everything you've already given. I'm not leaving until spring, Luke reminded them. Plenty of time to get you ready to manage alone. We won't be alone, Reed said, glancing at June. That is, if, June. I haven't done this properly, any of it, but I'd like to try. If you'll have me. Not the man from the letters, but the one standing here. Headaches and word loss and all. June's heart raced, but she kept her voice steady. Are you asking me to marry you? I'm asking you to stay, to build something with me, to write a new story together, one that's honest about who we really are. Reed squeezed her hand. And yes, when you're ready, to marry me. Though I understand if you need time to... Yes. Reed blinked. Yes to time, or yes to... Yes to all of it. June looked between the brothers. Yes to staying, to building, to marrying. Yes to helping Luke prepare for his journey. Yes to learning this ranch, this life. Yes to the whole complicated, imperfect truth of it. Reed pulled her close, and she went willingly, feeling his heart race against her chest. Over his shoulder, she saw Luke watching with a mixture of joy and sorrow that made her ache. I want to do this right, Reed murmured against her hair. Proper courtship, even if it's backwards. Let the town see I'm well enough to be a real husband, not just a burden you're taking on. You were never a burden, June said firmly, just a challenge, and I've always liked challenges. They separated, suddenly aware of Luke still standing there, witness to their beginning. I'm happy for you, Luke said simply, both of you, truly. And June believed him, even as she saw what it cost him to mean it. Later, after they'd gone inside and shared a drink to mark the moment, whiskey for the men, elderflower wine for June, she found herself alone with Luke while Reed wrote letters to announce their engagement. I meant what I said, she told him. We don't really know you, but I'd like to, before you go, as a friend, as family. Luke studied her. Why? Because Reed will miss you terribly, and I'd like to understand what he's missing. Because you're going to be my brother too, and that should mean something. Because... She paused, searching for truth. Because I think you're worth knowing. Luke Thatcher, not just as Reed's brother or the ranch's keeper, but as yourself. I don't know if I remember how to be that person. Luke admitted. Then we'll figure it out together. You teach me about ranching. I'll teach you about being selfish. Fair trade. Luke laughed a real laugh that transformed his face. You drive a hard bargain, future sister. Get used to it, June said. I plan to be very annoying about your happiness. That night, lying in her bed soon to be truly her home, June thought about the threads that connected them all. Reed with his words and dreams, slowly rebuilding himself into someone who could match reality to imagination. Luke with his competence and sacrifice, finally claiming the freedom to discover who he might be without the weight of everyone else's needs. And herself. No longer the Kansas spinster writing letters to a stranger, but a woman who'd chosen her place and found it good. Tomorrow would bring challenges, the town to face, work to learn, a wedding to plan, a farewell to prepare for. But tonight, she'd said yes to all of it, and that yes echoed through the house like a promise. In the barn, Cordelia shifted in her stall, her foal quickening inside her, new life preparing to enter the world, just as they were all preparing to be reborn into new versions of themselves. June smiled in the darkness and finally slept, dreaming of spring and all its possibilities. The news of June and Reed's engagement spread through Willow Falls like wildfire in dry grass. By the next market day, June couldn't walk 10 feet without someone stopping her to offer congratulations, advice, or thinly veiled speculation about the hasty nature of the match. A Christmas wedding. How lovely. Mrs. Crawford cooed, her earlier disapproval seemingly forgotten in the face of proper matrimony. Though I must say, dear, most people prefer a longer engagement. Gives time to prepare properly. We've been preparing through letters for months, June replied calmly, selecting apples from the grocer's barrel. I see no reason to delay now that we're together. Behind her, she heard Luke's quiet snort of amusement. He'd accompanied her to town, partly to help with supplies, but mostly, she suspected, to provide moral support against the gossip mill. Of course, dear, and how modern of you to continue working the ranch, though I suppose that will change once you're married. Mrs. Crawford's eyes glittered with curiosity. Why would it change? The work will still need doing. But surely, as Reed's wife, you'll want to focus on wifely duties. A proper home, children, eventually. A ranch is a proper home. Luke interjected, his tone mild but firm. And June's help has been invaluable. Reed's lucky to have found a partner who's not afraid of hard work. Mrs. Crawford's smile tightened. Yes, well, I suppose we all have different ideas about propriety. As they loaded the wagon, June caught Luke's eye. Wifely duties. Welcome to married life in Willow Falls, Luke said dryly, where everyone has opinions about how you should live it. They were halfway back to the ranch when June spotted a familiar figure walking along the road. Mrs. Patterson, carrying a basket and looking somewhat windblown. Whoa, Luke called to the horses, pulling alongside her. Mrs. Patterson, what are you doing out here on foot? Oh, Luke, June, how providential. I was coming to visit you all, but my nephew's wagon broke an axle. She gratefully accepted Luke's help onto the wagon seat. I have news that might interest you. Good news or bad? June asked, making room for the older woman. That depends on perspective. My cousin in California has written. She's opening a boarding house in Sacramento and needs help managing it. She's offered me a partnership. Mrs. Patterson's eyes twinkled. And I'm considering accepting. But you've been in Willow Falls for years, June said, surprised. 23 years, to be exact, since my husband died. Mrs. Patterson adjusted her shawl. Sometimes I think we stay in places out of habit rather than happiness. Your courage in leaving Kansas inspired me. June made me wonder what else might be possible. Luke guided the horses around a rough patch in the road. When would you leave? Spring. If I decide to go, seems like the season for new beginnings. She glanced meaningfully at Luke. I heard you're considering some travels yourself. Word travels fast, Luke murmured. It's a small town, and people care about you, whether you believe it or not. Mrs. Patterson patted his arm. Which brings me to my other news. If I leave, I'll need someone to take over the boarding house. Someone respectable. Good with accounts. Used to managing difficult personalities. She looked directly at June. Me, June blinked. But I'll be married, living at the ranch. The ranch is only 5 miles from town. You could easily manage both, especially with help. It would give you independence, income of your own, a place in town society beyond being Reed's wife. Mrs. Patterson smiled. Think about it. No rush to decide. They delivered Mrs. Patterson to town, promising to consider her offer. The ride back was quiet, June's mind spinning with possibilities. You're thinking about it, Luke observed. Is that wrong to want something of my own even after marriage? Not wrong. Smart. Ranch life can be isolating, especially for women. Having connections in town, responsibilities beyond these fences might be good for you. Reed might not see it that way. Luke glanced at her. Reed fell in love with an independent woman who crossed half the country on her own courage. Don't think he expects that to change just because you'll share his name. They found Reed in the barn with Doc Morrison, who'd come to check on his recovery. The doctor was nodding approvingly as Reed demonstrated his improved balance and coordination. Remarkable progress, Doc Morrison said. The headaches still come, but less often, and the words. Reed paused. choosing carefully. The words are mostly there when I need them. Good, good. I'd say you're well enough for normal activities. Just don't go breaking horses or getting into fistfights. What about getting married? Reed asked. Catching sight of June, Doc Morrison chuckled. That's a different kind of risk entirely, but medically speaking, you're cleared for it. After the doctor left, June told Reed about Mrs. Patterson's offer. She watched his face carefully, looking for signs of disapproval or hurt. Instead, Reed looked thoughtful. A boarding house. You'd be good at that. You have a way of making people comfortable, even when they don't deserve it. You wouldn't mind. June, I want you to have everything. The ranch, yes, but also your own pursuits, your own achievements. He pulled her close. Besides, might be nice to have somewhere respectable to send visiting cattle buyers instead of having them trek out here expecting meals. Practical romance? June teased. My favorite kind. That evening, as they gathered for dinner, the conversation turned to the future Luke's travel plans, the boarding house possibility, the winter preparations still needed. June listened to the brothers discuss grain orders and fence repairs, but her mind kept drifting to Mrs. Patterson's words about staying places out of habit rather than happiness. Where will you go? She asked Luke suddenly. When you leave. Luke paused in cutting his beef. Haven't decided. East, maybe. See the cities I've only heard about? Or south to Mexico. Always wondered about the vaquero way of handling horses. You'll write. Reed said it wasn't a question. If you want me to. Of course we want you to, June said firmly. I'll need someone to complain to about Reed's terrible jokes. Hey, Reed protested. My jokes are improving. Tell her the one about the three-legged horse. Luke. Absolutely not. But Luke was smiling, the tension that had lived in his shoulders for weeks finally easing. Later, June found herself alone with Reed on the porch, their new evening ritual. The December air was sharp, but they bundled close, sharing warmth and watching stars emerge. Are we doing this too fast? Reed asked suddenly. The engagement, the wedding plans, Luke leaving, you taking on the boarding house? Sometimes I feel like we're all rushing toward change, like it might disappear if we don't grab it. June considered. Maybe, but maybe we've all been standing still too long. You and Luke, locked in the same patterns since your parents died. Me in Kansas, afraid to want more. Maybe fast is what we need. When did you get so wise? Somewhere between mucking stalls and learning to make coffee strong enough to float horseshoes. June nestled closer. Reed, can I ask you something? Always. The letters you wrote, was it all you, or did Luke help with those too? Reed was quiet for a moment. The first few were all mine, but Luke, he'd read them before I sent them, started suggesting words when I got stuck. By the fifth or sixth letter, he was helping me shape whole paragraphs. Not the content that was me, but finding better ways to say things. So I fell in love with both of you, in a way. Does that bother you? June thought about it. No, it explains things. Actually, the way you two complete each other. The way the ranch feels empty when either of you is gone. She paused. I'm going to miss him terribly when he leaves. So will I. Reed's arm tightened around her. But I think he needs to go. Needs to find out who he is without me, without this place defining him. And you, who are you without him? Reed considered. I guess we'll find out together. The next few weeks passed in a blur of preparations. June accepted the boarding house proposition, contingent on Mrs. Patterson training her through the winter. She spent mornings at the ranch and afternoons in town, learning the books and meeting the regular boarders. The town's opinion shifted again, this time toward grudging respect. June Calder might be an outsider who'd arrived under questionable circumstances, but she was proving herself capable and committed, even Mrs. Crawford admitted that the boarding house would be in good hands. Reed grew stronger daily, taking on more ranch work as Luke taught them both the intricacies of management. Watching the brothers work side by side, June saw the shape of their shared history, the easy communication, the wordless understanding, the way they compensated for each other's weaknesses without thought. "I'll hire help," Reed promised one evening as they went over the account books. "Not trying to replace you, just—" "I know," Luke interrupted. "And it's good. Ranch is getting too big for 2 people anyway." 3, he corrected, glancing at June. The Christmas wedding was small but joyful. June wore her mother's dress, altered by the town seamstress. Reed stood steady and clear-eyed at the altar, finding his vows without stumbling. Luke served as best man, and if anyone noticed him blinking rapidly during the ceremony, they were kind enough not to mention it. The reception was held at the boarding house, Mrs. Patterson's gift to them. The whole town seemed to crowd into the parlor and dining room, spilling onto the porches despite the cold. June watched Reed navigate the social demands with returning confidence, saw Luke quietly ensuring everything ran smoothly, felt the community accepting her fully for the first time. "No regrets, Mrs.?" Patterson asked, finding June during a quiet moment. "None," June said honestly. "It's not the story I imagined, but it's the one I want." As the evening wound down, June noticed Luke had disappeared. She found him in the boarding house's small stable, checking the horses like he always did when needing solitude. "Running away from my own wedding reception," June said lightly. "Should I be offended?" "Just needed air." Luke didn't turn from the horse he was brushing. "You make a beautiful bride." "Luke, I'm happy for you," he said, finally facing her. "For both of you. Reed's himself again, maybe better than before. And you fit here like you were always meant to be part of this place. Part of us." "I meant what I said before. You're family now. That doesn't change when you leave." "I know." Luke set aside the brush. "June, can I ask you something? If Reed hadn't written those letters, if you just met us both as strangers, would you have—" He didn't finish, but she understood. "I don't know," June answered honestly. "But Reed did write. I did fall in love with those words. That mind, that heart brave enough to reach out to a stranger. That's our story. Wondering about other versions doesn't change it." Luke nodded. "You're right, and I'm glad it happened this way. Reed deserves someone who sees him complete, not just the broken parts or just the brilliant ones." They walked back to the reception together, where Reed was looking for his bride. His face lit up when he saw her, and June felt the rightness of it settle deep in her bones. Later, as the newlyweds prepared to return to the ranch, their ranch now, June overheard someone remark to Mrs. Crawford, "She certainly landed on her feet. Came here with nothing but a trunk and some letters. And now look married. Property. A business in town." "Yes, Mrs. Crawford replied, and June was surprised to hear warmth in her voice. "But she earned it, didn't she, every bit of it?" June smiled, taking Reed's arm as Luke brought the wagon around. Yes, she thought, she had earned it, not through calculation or design, but through choosing to stay when leaving would have been easier, through seeing broken things and believing they could heal, through writing her own story, one choice at a time. The lights of the boarding house faded behind them as they headed home to the ranch, where tomorrow would bring new challenges and familiar work. But tonight was for celebration, for rest, for the quiet satisfaction of promises made and kept. And in the spring, when Luke left to find his own story, they would be ready, different, changed, but still family, still connected by the threads of all they'd shared and all they'd chosen. The stars wheeled overhead, constant and bright, blessing their beginning. Spring arrived early that year, catching them all unprepared. The snow melted in rushing streams. The pastures turned green almost overnight. And Cordelia delivered a healthy colt on a morning when the sky stretched endlessly blue. Luke had been up all night with the mare, and June found him in the barn at dawn, exhausted but smiling as the wobbly-legged foal took its first steps. "A good omen," Reed said, joining them with coffee. "New life for a new season." But they all knew what spring meant. Luke's carefully packed bags sat by the door, his departure set for the end of the week. He'd trained Reed and June in everything from bookkeeping to birthing calves, written detailed notes about each horse's temperament, drawn maps of the property marking water sources and fence lines that needed regular checking. "You'd think I was going to the moon instead of San Francisco," Luke had said, embarrassed by their insistence on documentation. "Just want to do things right," Reed replied, "the way you taught us." The ranch ran smoothly now. They'd hired two hands Tom Morrison, the doctor's nephew, eager to escape his destiny in medicine, and Samuel Peters, an older man with decades of experience and a patient temperament. The boarding house thrived under June's management, providing steady income and connecting them more deeply to the town community. Everything was ready for Luke's departure. Everything except their hearts. 3 days before Luke was to leave, Reed disappeared after breakfast. June found him in their bedroom, sitting on the floor surrounded by papers, every letter they'd exchanged, spread out like a map of their beginning. "What are you doing?" she asked gently. "Reading, remembering." Reed picked up a page, his thumb tracing the words. "Did you know Luke helped write this one, the part about the sunset looking like God spilled paint across the sky? That was his line." June sat beside him, gathering scattered pages. "He has a poet's eye, even if he'd never admit it." "He's leaving because of us, because of me." "Reed." "No, listen." Reed turned to face her. "I've been selfish our whole lives. Took his care, his strength, his presence for granted. And now, when I finally have everything, health, love, purpose, he's the one going away empty-handed." "He's not empty-handed. He's free. There's a difference." Reed wasn't convinced. That evening, June noticed the brothers barely spoke at dinner, both lost in their own thoughts. The next morning, Reed was gone before dawn, leaving only a note. "Gone to town. Back by evening. Don't worry." But June did worry, especially when Luke paced the porch like a caged animal, clearly unsettled by his brother's absence. "He's planning something," Luke muttered. "I know that look. Would that be so bad, wanting to give you a proper goodbye?" Luke stopped pacing. "I don't need grand gestures. Just need to know he'll be all right without me." "He will be. We both will. But that doesn't mean we won't miss you terribly." Luke's expression softened. "June, I need you to promise me something. If Reed has bad days and don't let him sink into them. He broods when given the chance, gets lost in his own head. I know, I have seen it. And take care of yourself too. Don't lose yourself in taking care of everyone else." Luke paused. "That's my mistake to learn from, not yours to repeat." Reed returned as the sun was setting, dusty and pleased with himself. He wouldn't say where he'd been, just smiled mysteriously and changed the subject whenever they asked. The truth revealed itself the next morning. June woke to find both brothers gone and a note on the kitchen table in Reed's careful hand. "Follow the path to Eagle's Rest. Bring coffee." Eagle's Rest was a rocky outcrop overlooking the valley, a 20-minute ride from the ranch. June had been there once with Luke, who'd shown her how the eagles nested in the tall pines, returning year after year to the same home. She found them there, sitting on the rocks with their backs to her, shoulders touching in rare physical closeness. As she approached, she saw what Reed had done. A wooden marker stood planted firmly in the ground, carved with neat letters. "Thatcher Family Ground. James and Mary Thatcher. Together always Reed and Luke Thatcher. Brothers always no matter the distance." Below were compass points NSEW with Luke carved pointing toward all of them. "Reed had Tom Morrison help him yesterday," Luke said without turning. His voice was thick. "Said every explorer needs a home to remember, even when they're finding new ones." June set down the coffee and sat on Luke's other side, the three of them looking out over the valley that had shaped them all. "It's perfect," she said simply. They stayed there as the morning warmed, sharing coffee and memories. Reed told the story of their first cattle drive. Luke recounted teaching Reed to ride after a bad fall. June contributed her own recent memories, Luke's patience teaching her to read horse behavior, Reed's determination to relearn skills the injury had stolen. "Remember when you go," Reed said finally. "You're not running away. You're running toward... There's a difference." "When did you get philosophical?" Luke asked, but he was smiling. "When I married a woman who reads Shakespeare to chickens, tends to expand a man's thinking." The morning of Luke's departure dawned gray and misty, as if the weather itself was reluctant to let him go. The whole household gathered. Even Tom and Samuel had arrived early to say goodbye. Mrs. Patterson came from town, bringing fresh bread and embarrassing Luke with motherly fussing. "You write, you hear me," she instructed. "These two will want to know everything: where you're staying, what you're eating, who you're meeting." "Yes, ma'am," Luke agreed, enduring her hug with good grace. His possessions fit in 2 saddlebags and a small trunk clothes. His father's compass, a daguerreotype of the family from before. Reed and June's wedding photograph, and a leather journal June had given him. "For your own letters," she'd said, "or thoughts, or sketches, whatever needs recording." Reed stepped forward as Luke finished securing his bags to his horse. Not Hamlet or any of the working animals, but Zeus, his personal mount, a gift from Reed. "You sure about this?" Reed asked one last time. "Sure as I've been about anything." Luke gripped his brother's shoulder. "Take care of the place. Take care of each other. Take care of that foal. I want to hear all about his training." "His name's Wanderer," Reed said. Seemed fitting. Luke's composure finally cracked. He pulled Reed into a fierce embrace, the kind they hadn't shared since their parents' funeral. June heard Reed whisper something too low to catch, saw Luke nod against his shoulder. When they separated, both men's eyes were bright. Luke turned to June. "Sister," he said simply, and she flew into his arms. "You come back," she whispered fiercely. "Wherever you go, whatever you find, you come back to us." "I will." Luke pulled back, touching her cheek briefly. "Thank you for seeing us both, for choosing to stay, for everything." He mounted Zeus with the fluid grace that marked everything he did. The horse danced a little, sensing the journey ahead. Luke looked back at them, all his family by blood and choice, the ranch that had been his whole world, the mountains that had sheltered them. "I'll write from San Francisco," he promised. Then, with a touch of his heels, he was gone. Zeus's hooves raising small puffs of dust on the road to town. They stood watching until horse and rider disappeared around the bend. June felt Reed's hand find hers, squeezing tight. "He'll be all right," she said, as much for herself as for Reed. "I know, it's us I'm worried about." But Reed was half smiling through his tears. "Come on, ranch won't run itself, and we've got a boarding house inspection this afternoon." Life continued, shaped by absence but not defined by it. They found Luke's presence everywhere in systems he'd created, habits he'd instilled, the smooth running of operations he'd perfected over years. But they also found themselves, individually and together, growing into spaces that had always been filled by someone else. Reed's confidence returned fully as he managed the ranch without Luke's safety net. His headaches became rare, and his words flowed freely again, not just in speech but on paper. He started writing stories about ranch life, sending them to newspapers back east. June balanced the boarding house and ranch work with increasing skill, earning the town's respect through sheer competence. The boarding house became a gathering place, somewhere travelers could find good food, clean rooms, and intelligent conversation. The first letter from Luke arrived 3 weeks after his departure. "Dear Reed and June, San Francisco is loud. I'd forgotten places could hold so much noise. The ocean is nothing like I imagined, bigger, angrier, more beautiful. I've found work at a stable, of course, and a room above a bakery. The smell of bread makes me homesick every morning. Met a man who's organizing an expedition to map parts of Northern California. Might join them. My compass points true, but I think of Eagle's Rest every dawn. Tell Wanderer I expect great things. Tell the chickens June's still in charge. Tell yourselves I miss you both more than these words can carry. Your brother always, Luke. June read it aloud at dinner, then twice more at Reed's request. They wrote back immediately, both of them adding pages to the same letter, their different handwriting weaving together like conversation. 2 months later, another letter came, this time from the Northern California wilderness. Luke wrote of giant trees that made him feel small, of tracking with native guides who knew the land like their own heartbeat, of nights so quiet he could hear his own pulse. I understand now, he wrote, why you needed those letters. Read. Why June needed to answer them. Sometimes we have to speak across distance to hear ourselves clearly. Summer faded to autumn. The boarding house thrived. The ranch prospered. Reed sold 3 stories to magazines, each acceptance making him glow with quiet pride. June discovered she was expecting their first child, news that prompted a flurry of preparations and planning. Luke's letters came regularly, each from somewhere in New Sacramento, Portland, even one from a ship bound for Alaska. He sent sketches of mountains, pressed flowers June couldn't identify, descriptions of people and places that revealed a gift for observation, finally given free rein. He's becoming himself, Reed said one evening, reading Luke's latest adventure. The self he never had room to be here. Do you regret it, his leaving? No. Reed folded the letter carefully. I miss him every day, but watching him discover the world, discover himself, it's worth it. We held each other up for so long. Neither of us learned to stand alone. Now we can choose to stand together. The first snow was falling when unexpected hoofbeats sounded in the yard. June looked up from her sewing, her hand going instinctively to her rounded belly. Reed grabbed the rifle by the door, then froze. That's Zeus, he said wonderingly. They rushed to the porch as Luke swung down from his horse, travel-worn but smiling wider than June had ever seen. He looked different, sun-darkened, leaner, carrying himself with new confidence. Thought I'd come home for Christmas, he said casually, as if he'd been gone days instead of months. If that's all right. Reed nearly knocked him over with the force of his embrace. June waited her turn, then hugged Luke as fiercely as her condition allowed. You're staying, she asked hopefully. For a while, few weeks, maybe more. Luke's eyes dropped to her obvious pregnancy. Seems I'm about to be an uncle. Wouldn't miss that for all the mountains in Alaska. They pulled him inside, pelting him with questions, feeding him, marveling at the changes in him. Luke told stories of his travels, of people met and sights seen, of the vast world beyond Willow Falls. But he also asked endless questions about the ranch, the boarding house, their lives. I needed to see it, he said finally, as they sat before the fire. Needed to know there was more than this valley. But knowing it's here, that you're here, that's what makes the traveling possible. Does that make sense? Perfect sense, June said. It's what Reed's letters were for me, a lifeline to possibility. Speaking of letters, Luke said, producing a worn journal from his pack. I've been writing, not letter stories, observations. Thought maybe, he looked at Reed. Thought maybe you could tell me if they're any good, if they're worth anything. Reed took the journal reverently. Everything you write is worth something, brother. Later, as they prepared the guest room for Luke, his old room, now truly a place for visiting rather than living, June found herself watching the brothers. They moved around each other easily, the old rhythm still there but looser, less desperate. They were choosing each other now, rather than clinging to each other. "Thank you," Luke said quietly when Reed stepped out. "For taking care of him. For making this a home worth returning to." "It's your home too, always." Luke smiled. "I know. That's the gift, knowing I can leave and it'll still be here. Still be home. Still be mine to come back to." That night, as snow continued to fall, June lay beside Reed, listening to the familiar sounds of the house settling. Down the hall, Luke's boots hit the floor one by one. In the barn, Wanderer whinnied softly. The world was vast and full of possibilities, but home was here, defined not by boundaries, but by choices, by the letters that started it all, by the brothers who'd learned to let go in order to hold tighter, by the love that grew in unexpected ways, rooted deep and reaching wide. Tomorrow would bring more stories, more questions, more life growing and changing. But tonight, they were complete, a family shaped by distance and drawn together by choice, writing their continuing story in the space between staying and going, between holding on and setting free. 1 year later, the town still called June the girl from the letters, but now with warmth rather than suspicion. She'd become a fixture in Willow Falls, running the boarding house with gentle efficiency, helping at the ranch, raising young Thomas Reed Thatcher with the same practical love that had carried her from Kansas to Oregon. The baby had arrived during a spring thunderstorm, with Doc Morrison attending and Reed pacing the hallway like a caged cougar. When Thomas's first cry rang out, Reed had burst into tears of relief, and June had laughed through her exhaustion at the sight of her husband, the man who'd faced down wild horses and bitter winters undone by an infant's wail. Now Thomas toddled through the boarding house parlor, charming guests and leaving chaos in his wake. June watched him from the desk where she kept the accounts, marveling at how life had expanded to encompass so much more than she dreamed during those long Kansas nights. Mrs. Thatcher. A young woman stood in the doorway, travel-worn and uncertain. "I'm Sarah Meadows. I believe you have a room available." Something in the girl's stance, proud but fragile, determined but lost, reminded June of herself stepping off that train 2 years ago. "We do indeed. How long will you be staying?" "I'm not certain. I've come to take a teaching position, but—" Sarah's voice wavered. "Things aren't quite as I expected." June recognized that tone too, the sound of dreams meeting reality and finding them mismatched. "Well, we'll start with a week and see how things develop. My husband always says the best stories reveal themselves 1 page at a time." That evening, Reed returned from the ranch to find June setting an extra place at their private table. New boarder. New teacher, Sarah Meadows. She seems— June paused, choosing words. "Adrift. Thought she might appreciate a family dinner rather than eating alone." Reed smiled, pulling her close, still collecting strays. "Says the man who named a chicken Desdemona last week." Sarah joined them for dinner, shy at first but warming to Reed's gentle humor and Thomas's babbled contributions to conversation. She'd come from Pennsylvania, answering an advertisement for Willow Falls' new school teacher. "The position is real," she assured them. "But the schoolhouse is rustic, and the board president seems to think a female teacher is a temporary solution until they can find a proper man for the job." "That would be Jeremiah Crawford," June said dryly. "His wife leads the social committee. They have firm opinions about women's proper places." "Which June delights in ignoring," Reed added proudly. After Sarah retired, June found Reed at his desk, working on his latest story. His writing had flourished alongside his recovery, magazines back east regularly accepting his tales of Western life. But tonight he was reading rather than writing. Luke's journal open before him. "Another letter today?" June asked, recognizing Luke's evolving handwriting. "From Nevada. He's working at a ranch there, learning their methods. Says their way with wild horses makes ours look ham-fisted." Reed traced a passage with his finger. "He's getting good. June, really good. These observations, The way he captures place and moment. It's remarkable. June read over his shoulder. Luke's prose was indeed striking spare where Reed's was elaborate, but piercing in its clarity. He wrote about the desert like a man discovering color after years of gray, about horses like they were philosophy in motion. Have you told him he should seek publication? 3 times. He ignores me. Reed closed the journal carefully. Sometimes I think he writes just for himself, to prove he can, to claim something entirely his own. Like Sarah teaching despite the school board's prejudice, like you writing through the headaches, like me running from Kansas. June kissed the top of his head. We're all writing our own stories, aren't we? Speaking of which, Reed pulled her onto his lap. I've been thinking about that last letter you never sent me, the one you wrote the night before leaving Kansas. June had told him about it months ago, the letter that said she was coming, that she'd hidden instead of mailing. What about it? I want to read it, if you still have it. June hesitated. That letter held the raw truth of her fears and hopes, written when Reed was still more dream than reality. But secrets had no place in the life they'd built. She retrieved it from the wooden box where she kept precious things, their correspondence, Thomas's first booties, pressed flowers from their wedding. Reed read silently, his expression shifting from curiosity to something deeper. When he finished, he folded the letter carefully and looked up at her with wet eyes. You were so brave, he said, coming here on nothing but hope and worn-out shoe leather. I was terrified, June corrected. But being terrified in motion felt better than being terrified standing still. Spring brought unexpected visitors. First, Mrs. Patterson returned from California, glowing with success and stories of her boarding house empire in Sacramento. She stayed a week, marveling at the changes and cooing over Thomas. You've made something wonderful here, she told June. Both of you. That lost girl from Kansas and that broken cowboy, look at you now. The second visitor appeared on a morning when mist clung to the valley like wool. June was teaching Sarah to make proper biscuits. The younger woman's cooking skills were theoretical at best when hoofbeats echoed in the yard. That's Zeus, Reed said from the doorway, wonder in his voice. Luke had come home again, but this time he wasn't alone. A woman rode beside him, tall, sun-browned, with black hair braided simply and intelligent eyes that took in everything at once. Reed, June, Luke said as he dismounted, his smile radiant. I'd like you to meet Maria Santos. We met in Nevada. She's, well... I'm his wife, Maria said, swinging down from her horse with practiced ease. Her accent carried music Spanish, mellowed by years in American territories. He's shy about saying it, like he still can't believe I said yes. The story tumbled out over coffee and fresh biscuits. Maria trained horses on her family's ranch, using methods passed down through generations of vaqueros. Luke had arrived seeking work and found himself fascinated by both the techniques and the woman teaching them. He was terrible at first, Maria confided, eyes dancing. So serious, so rigid. I told him horses don't read instruction manuals. She said I sat a horse like I was afraid it might break, Luke added, gazing at his wife with open adoration. Took weeks to convince her I was worth teaching. And then, June prompted, delighted by this version of Luke, relaxed, laughing, touching Maria's hand like he needed to confirm she was real. Then he wrote me a letter, Maria said, left it in the tack room for me to find, about watching me work with the horses. How it was like watching poetry. This quiet American cowboy who barely spoke 3 words suddenly writing poetry. Runs in the family, Reed murmured, grinning at Luke's embarrassment. They'd married in a small ceremony at her family's ranch, then traveled north together, combining their knowledge to work with difficult horses other trainers had given up on. We thought we'd stay for the summer. Luke said, help with the ranch, let you get to know Maria. If that's all right. All right, Reed stood, pulling his brother into a fierce hug. It's perfect. It's everything. That night, the house fuller than it had ever been. June found herself on the porch despite the cool evening air. She needed a moment to absorb it all: Luke's happiness, Maria's easy integration into their rhythms, Sarah gaining confidence with each day, Thomas sleeping peacefully in his crib. Reed joined her, wrapping a blanket around them both. Overwhelming. In the best way. June leaned into his warmth. 2 years ago, I was alone in Kansas, writing letters to a stranger. Now look at us. Look at all of this. Do you ever miss it, the simplicity of just letters between us? June considered. Sometimes, there was something pure about knowing each other only through words. But this, she gestured at the lit windows. The sound of Luke and Maria laughing in the kitchen. This is better, messier, harder, realer, better. Maria wants to start a horse training school, Reed said. Here in Oregon, she and Luke have been planning. They're looking at the Hendricks property. It borders ours on the north. Neighbors, June's heart lifted. Truly. If it works out, Luke says he's done wandering for now. Says he found what he was looking for. Reed paused. I think we all did, in our ways. Inside, Sarah was reading aloud from one of Reed's published stories, while Maria and Luke cleaned dishes with the ease of long practice. The boarding house guests had gathered in the parlor, drawn by the warmth and laughter that had become June's signature as proprietress. I should go in, June said. Make sure everyone has what they need. They can wait another minute, Reed said, holding her close. I want to tell you something. That first letter I wrote to you, the one about the mountains wearing clouds like hats, I almost didn't send it. Thought it was too fanciful, too revealing. Luke convinced me to mail it anyway. Said the worst that could happen was silence. Instead, you got me. Instead, I got everything. Reed turned her to face him. Thank you, June, for answering, for coming, for staying, for building this life with me when the one we'd imagined fell apart. We didn't build it alone, June reminded him, thinking of all the hands that had shaped their story. Luke, Mrs. Patterson, even the town gossips who pushed us to prove ourselves. We're all connected, all part of each other's stories. Through the window, she could see Luke showing Sarah a rope trick while Maria corrected his form with gentle teasing. The boarding house guests applauded when Sarah managed it on her third try. Thomas would wake soon, ready for his evening feeding. The ranch needed checking, the boarding house books updating, tomorrow's bread starting. But for now, June stood in her husband's arms, watching their collected family through lamp-lit windows, and marveled at how a misdirected letter had led to all of this. Not the life she'd expected when she'd boarded that train in Kansas, but the life she'd needed, full of challenge and change, loss and finding, the daily choice to stay and build and love. Come on, she said finally. Our people are waiting. They went inside together, into the warmth and light and noise of the life they'd written letter by letter, choice by choice, day by day, behind them. The Oregon stars wheeled overhead, constant witnesses to all the stories still being written, all the connections still being made, all the love still growing in the space between what was dreamed and what was real. In the wooden box in their bedroom, the letters weighted yellow with age, but still precious, still true. The first chapter of a story that had no ending, only the endless possibility of the next page, the next word, the next choice to stay and see what happened next. And in the morning, when the sun painted the mountains gold and the horses called from the pasture and Thomas woke with his father's smile and his mother's determination, they would write another page together, always together, no matter the distance. Thank you so much for listening to this story of love, family, and finding home in unexpected places. I'd love to hear where you're listening from. Please share in the comments below so we can connect and discuss your thoughts about June and Reed's journey. If you enjoyed this tale from the American frontier, please subscribe to Wild West Stories 1850. Give this video a like and hit the hype button to help more people discover these stories of the Old West. Your support helps me continue bringing these historical romances to life. Until next time, partners.